1994, a 30-year-old man quit his job at a hedge fund, packed everything he owned into a car, and drove across the country with no customers, no investors, and no guarantee that what he was about to do would work. His wife believed in him. His parents gave him $60,000, money they could not afford to lose. He set up a desk in a garage in Bellevue, Washington, wrote the code himself, and started selling books online. That man was Jeff Bezos. And what most people don't know is that he didn't wake up on day one with a plan to build $1 trillion company. He had a 10-year plan to survive. Because that's what this is actually about. Not a fantasy, not a motivational speech, a decade-long sequence of decisions, each one harder than the last, each one building something the next phase cannot exist without. Billionaires are not made in a moment of inspiration. They are made in years of deliberate construction. And today, we are going to walk through exactly what that construction looks like, phase by phase, year by year, so that you understand not just what to do, but why it works and what it will actually cost you. This is the 10-year plan to become a billionaire. Every fortune begins with the same thing, not an idea, not capital, not a lucky break. It begins with a problem that will not leave you alone. In 2003, Sarah Blakely was 27 years old, selling fax machines door to door in Atlanta. She had $200 in savings and an insight she couldn't shake. Women's shapewear was fundamentally broken. It was uncomfortable. It was visible under clothing. Nobody had solved it. She thought about it constantly, on her commute, at the dinner table, in the middle of the night. That obsession is not accidental. Research from the University of Warwick found that entrepreneurs who described their early ventures as an obsession rather than an opportunity were 40% more likely to still be operating 5 years later. The difference isn't passion in the motivational sense. It's the ability to stay focused on a single problem when every rational part of your brain tells you to give up. In years 1 and 2, your only job is to identify that problem. Not to build an empire, not to raise money, not to build a brand. To find the thing that is genuinely broken, that you genuinely understand better than most people, and that enough people genuinely need solved. This phase will feel slow. It will feel unproductive. You will watch people around you getting promoted, buying houses, taking vacations. And you will be in your apartment or your garage, obsessively studying a problem that hasn't paid you $1 yet. Bezos did not build Amazon in year 1. He built the obsession in year 1. He studied online retail for 12 months before he left his job. He made a spreadsheet of 20 possible product categories. He ranked them by market size, by shipping complexity, by the ability to compete. Books won because they were small, they were standardized, and no physical bookstore could carry more than 150,000 titles. The internet could carry them all. The lesson is simple and brutal. In years 1 and 2, you are not building a company. You are building a thesis. And that thesis must be specific enough to be actionable and right enough to be defensible, because every decision you make for the next 8 years will rest on it. There is a story most people don't know about Nike. In 1964, Phil Knight didn't start with a factory, a logo, or a global supply chain. He started with $1,200 and a suitcase full of running shoes that he imported from Japan and sold out of the back of his car at track meets. He drove to Stanford, set up a folding table, and sold. Then, he drove to Oregon State. Then, he drove to San Jose. He didn't wait for a store. He didn't wait for investment. He made his first sale and used that money to buy 12 more pairs of shoes. By the end of year 1, he had sold $8,000 worth of product. That is what years 3 and 4 look like in a 10-year plan, not a launch, a proof. This phase is about one question only. Does anyone actually want this? Not your friends, not your family, not the people who tell you your idea is great over dinner. Strangers. People who will hand over their money or their time with no relationship obligation, because what you've built solves something real for them. The minimum viable product concept, popularized by entrepreneur Eric Ries, is often misunderstood as build the cheapest version possible. It's not. It's build the version that answers the only question that matters in this phase, which is, does this work? Does it solve the problem? Will someone pay for it? Sarah Blakely spent 2 years developing her Spanx prototype before she approached a single retailer. She personally drove the prototype to the Neiman Marcus buyer, cut off the legs of her pantyhose in front of her in a bathroom, and demonstrated the product on herself. Neiman Marcus placed an order. She had proof. The discipline of this phase is refusing to scale before you have proof. And this is where most aspiring billionaires fail. They raise money, hire people, build infrastructure, launch marketing campaigns, and run out of runway before they know whether the core product actually works. They confuse activity with progress. In years 3 and 4, be small, be scrappy, be obsessed with signal. One customer who returns is worth more than 1,000 who subscribed and disappeared. Find the return. Build everything around making it happen again. This is the phase that destroys most ventures, not because the product fails, not because the market isn't there, because the founder breaks. There is a psychological phenomenon that researchers at Harvard Business School have documented across hundreds of entrepreneur case studies. They call it the implementation dip. It is the period, usually between years 4 and 7, when the initial excitement has worn off. The early wins feel distant. The problems are multiplying faster than the solutions, and the people around you have moved on with their lives in ways that make your sacrifice feel increasingly difficult to justify. Elon Musk hit this wall in 2008. SpaceX had failed 3 rocket launches in a row. The company was nearly out of money. Tesla was on the verge of bankruptcy. Musk had invested his entire PayPal payout into both companies and was borrowing money from friends to pay his rent. In interviews years later, he described this period as the closest he ever came to a complete psychological collapse. What kept him going was not optimism. It was a framework. He had broken the problem down to what he called first principles. The fundamental physics of what a rocket had to do, the fundamental economics of what an electric car had to cost to be viable at scale. When everything felt impossible, he returned to the first principles, not to feel better, to find the next decision that was within his control. This is the discipline of years 5 and 6, not motivation, framework. Because your belief in the idea will fluctuate. Your energy will fluctuate. The market will give you good months and then take them away. The only thing that doesn't fluctuate is a clear decision-making process rooted in what is actually true about your business. Ask yourself 3 questions in this phase. Is the problem still real? Is my solution still the best answer available? And what is the single most important constraint I need to remove to move forward? Everything else is noise. This phase tests whether you can separate signal from noise when the noise is very loud and very personal. The founders who make it through the valley do not do it because they are tougher. They do it because they build systems that keep them rational when their emotions are telling them to quit or to panic or to change everything at once. Hold the line. The valley ends. If you have survived phase 3, something remarkable begins to happen in years 7 and 8. The compounding starts to become visible. Jeff Bezos talked about this in an early shareholder letter. He described the flywheel, a concept borrowed from business theorist Jim Collins. The idea is simple. Lower prices attract more customers. More customers attract more sellers. More sellers increase selection. More selection attracts more customers. More customers give you more data. More data lets you lower prices further. The wheel turns slowly at first, and then, with enough mass, it becomes almost impossible to stop. Every billion-dollar business has a flywheel. The shape is different for each one, but the principle is identical. The components reinforce each other. Growth creates more growth. In years 7 and 8, your job is to identify your flywheel and eliminate everything that isn't part of it. This is the phase where most entrepreneurs make the opposite mistake of their early years. In years 1 through 4, they try to do too much before they have proof. In years 7 and 8, they try to do too many things once they have momentum. Mark Zuckerberg has said repeatedly that the most important strategic decision Facebook made in its early years was what it refused to build. While competitors were adding games, music, news feeds, video, and commerce all at once, Facebook focused on one thing: connection between real people using real names. The depth of that single feature created lock-in that no competitor could easily replicate. Warren Buffett describes this principle as the moat. Not the castle, the moat. The thing that makes it difficult for competitors to take what you've built. In years 7 and 8, build the moat. Identify the 1 or 2 things your business does better than anyone, that your customers cannot easily get elsewhere, and invest disproportionately in those things while systematically defunding everything else. This is also the phase where the right people become a multiplier, not a large team, the right team. Research from Stanford's Graduate School of Business found that the founding team configuration at the time of a company's Series B funding was the single strongest predictor of whether the company would reach $100 million in revenue. Not the product, not the market. The people who understood the mission deeply enough to make decisions without being told what to decide. Hire slow. Protect your culture like it is a competitive asset. Because it is, here's a number that very few people think about clearly. $1 billion is not 10 times $100 million. It is not even close to the same process. In 2011, Airbnb reached $100 million in bookings. By 2015, they hit $1 billion in revenue. The jump from $100 million to $1 billion did not come from doing the same things better. It came from a fundamental shift in how the business operated, who it served, and what it believed was possible. Brian Chesky, Airbnb's co-founder, has talked at length about what he calls the 7-star experience. The practice of imagining not just what a good experience looks like, but what a mind-blowing, impossible experience looks like, and then working backward from that vision to find the version that is actually achievable. He used this thinking to redesign the entire Airbnb host and guest journey from scratch, not because it was broken, but because he understood that at scale, small improvements in experience create enormous compounding returns in customer lifetime value and word of mouth. Years 9 and 10 are the inflection years. The years where the thinking has to become bigger than the operation. The reason most businesses plateau between $50 million and $200 million in value is not that the market isn't there. It's that the founder's thinking plateaus first. The habits, processes, and mindsets that built the first 100 million are often the exact things that prevent the first billion. Jeff Bezos famously told his board in the early 2000s that Amazon would need to be prepared to cannibalize its own most profitable business models before a competitor did. That kind of thinking, willingness to disrupt yourself, is what separates the companies that plateau from the companies that compound. In years 9 and 10, ask the question that most entrepreneurs are too afraid to ask. If I were starting this company today, knowing everything I know, what would I do completely differently? And then be honest enough to actually do it. This is the phase of reinvention, not because what you built was wrong, because what comes next requires a different version of you. There is a detail about Jeff Bezos' garage that most people skip over. Before he drove across the country to start Amazon, he sat down with his wife Mackenzie and they made a list. Not a list of goals, a list of what they were willing to sacrifice: sleep, certainty, financial security, social normalcy, the version of their life that was already decent and getting better. They wrote it all down, and then they made the decision with full knowledge of the cost. That is the real starting point of every 10-year plan that works. Not the idea, not the capital, not the strategy. the willingness to make the trade. Because this plan will take 10 years. There will be phases that feel like failure. There will be relationships that strain under the weight of your focus. There will be years where you look at the people around you and genuinely cannot tell whether you made the right choice. But here is what the research consistently shows, and what every major fortune in modern history confirms. The people who reach the end of this decade-long process do not feel like they sacrificed their life for money. They feel like they built the most interesting, meaningful, difficult thing they have ever done, because the billion was never really the point. The point was the construction, the decade of decisions, the machine you built from nothing. The billion is just the proof that the machine worked. Start building.